On Thursday, Andrew Zarian of the Mat Men podcast dropped some interesting news that starting July 18th, which is tomorrow, for those who don't know, WWE Raw will have a TV-14 rating moving forward on USA Network. The PG era is over, is what he declared on Twitter. Now, Monday Night Raw used to be a PG-rated show up until 1997 when it shifted to TV-14, and it's stayed that way until July of 2008. That was the birth of what people refer to as the PG era, which is kind of silly if you think about it because the product was already PG for 20 years before that. But then later on that same day, Zarian posted an update and said, well, not so fast. Said, this is a wild situation. There's a lot happening behind the scenes. WWE Raw won't be going to TV-14 on July 18th, but it is still in consideration for a later date. There was a memo within USA Network that went out this morning regarding Raw changing to TV-14 on July 18th. Apparently that was sent out prematurely, and the day was not finalized. So the latest is this. There was a memo sent out internally within USA Network about Raw moving to TV-14, and it looks like it went out earlier than it was supposed to. So it is very likely that the change is going to happen. It's just not going to happen tomorrow night. Now, over the years, I've heard people cite the Benoit murder-suicide as the reason for WWE shifting to a PG product, and it may have played a small role in the company wanting to clean up its image and eliminate, chair shots to the head and things of that nature. But the move to PG was happening whether or not Chris Benoit killed himself and killed his family. That happened a full year before they went PG. And I think people give too much credit to that as being the real catalyst to all this. The main reason the company went PG is because earlier that same year, in February of 2008, WWE signed a multi-year agreement with Mattel, which was, and I believe may still be, the biggest toy manufacturer in the world. Okay, Mattel makes Barbie, they make Matchbox cars, Fisher-Price, okay, huge company, that's all Mattel. WWE had been working with Jakks Pacific for many years, and they ended up suing Jakks over some alleged bribery scheme involving the video game license. It was a whole mess. It went on for years. So how awkward was that, right? They had to work together for X number of years while they were suing them in court. But they kept working together on their various toy lines and the action figures and whatnot because they had a contract. Later on, though, they awarded their toy license to Mattel. That was 1 year before the agreement with Jakks expired. They already went and announced that our next big toy maker is going to be Mattel. And Jakks ended up working with TNA on their own line of action figures. But they signed that deal with Mattel in early 2008. That summer is when they took the product PG. And that, more than anything else, had to do with them making that change. They had made certain promises to the Mattel folks about what they would and would not do on their television shows. Because you can understand, if you're an executive with a major toy company, right, you manufacture toys for children. And WWE wants to do business with you, and you want to do business with them, but you have some reservations when you put the TV on and you watch the product as it used to be during that time period, even into 2007, 2008, you're going to have some reservations. You're going to want some promises made, I think, before you jump into bed with these people. And I guess whatever WWE promised them, they were comfortable with that, and so that was kind of part of the whole agreement. That was part of the whole arrangement that they made together. So there were certain promises made. They're still working with Mattel today, so I doubt there would be any major noticeable changes to the type of content that they allow on their shows. And this is really why I think people need to temper their expectations for what this all means. Anyone throwing a party, this is going to be the return of some kind of glory era of WWE programming, you're going to be massively disappointed. Again, I hate to be the bearer of bad news here, but I think people need to just cool their jets. When you think of the era of TV-14, WWE shows, what do you think of? What is the first thing that you think of, right? You probably think of the Attitude Era. You probably think of blood. You think of chair shots to the head. You think of cussing on live TV. You think of bra and panties matches and gravy bowl matches on Thanksgiving. How much of that do you honestly believe that you're going to start seeing on television? Here's a better question. I got an even better question for you. Why do you think any of that is going to make Raw a better show? They're never going to do blood on television the way that AEW does. If you're a big blood guy, they're never going to do it at the level that even an AEW does. AEW is like a fucking bloodbath every other week. We have a barbed wire death match on Dynamite this Wednesday. More blood. You're never going to see that on WWE television. We already see blood occasionally anyway. Usually it's hard way, but it's not as if we never see blood on WWE shows. Chair shots to the head are dead and buried, as they should be. Bra and panties matches, that doesn't exactly fit with the whole women's revolution stuff that they love to talk about. They just installed a woman as their interim CEO. Their former CEO is being investigated for hush money payments because he'll fuck anything that moves. And the Wall Street Journal is apparently working on another McMahon story that could drop any week now. So that story isn't going away. You know, tits and ass television is not suddenly going to make a comeback. I mean, it can't anyway, right? I mean, John Laurinaitis is the one with the subscriptions to all the swimsuit catalogs, and he's been placed on administrative leave. I mean, who are they going to get to do the recruiting for them? Then there's all the adult language. We had Brock Lesnar on Raw less than a week ago using the word shit-kicking. Or remember when he told Heath Slater, I don't give a shit about your kids. That was 6 years ago. Even if they bleeped it out, so what? He still said it. Lots of people have spit out 4-letter words on Raw over the years, even in the PG era. And I love a well-placed 4-letter word myself. I think it can be very effective, so long as it's not overused, like it is in AEW. I feel like every other promo, not even every other promo, every promo in AEW has the word shit in it. Jade Cargill's in the back for 30 seconds talking to Tony Schiavone. Tony, cut the shit. Right? We get that every week. Maybe that's why USA is doing this. They see what TBS and TNT allow with AEW, and they want to give WWE the same latitude on their show to be a little edgier. It's possible. But people need to quit pretending like the show, you know, these shows have been My Little Pony or Sesame Street for the past 14 years. And we never see anything edgy, and we never hear any kind of risque language. That's just not true. WWE programming was always considered PG all throughout the 80s. You know, when I first started watching, I was of that age, right? You had all the cartoon gimmicks, and it was a very tame show for the most part, even into the early 90s. And that whole era, you know, the 80s, that's the golden era, right? That's what people call it. It's the golden era of WWE. It was always considered PG, even though the actual TV rating system in the US actually wasn't even introduced until 1997. That's when we first started seeing the little black box in the corner of the screen that said TV PG or, you know, TV-14, or if you were a South Park fan, right, it was always TVMA for mature audiences. That whole system wasn't even introduced until 97. So, you know, when I say that it was a PG show, I don't mean literally, you know, they had a PG box in the corner of the screen when the show, you know, came on the air every week, because that system didn't actually exist. But it was basically a PG show. But some of my fondest wrestling memories and some of the best angles and some of the best stories came from a time when the product was a PG product. There was very little that would have been considered inappropriate for kids under the age of 13 back then. And then came the Attitude Era, where the language got a little edgier and the stories got a little edgier, and then they got a lot edgier. And it was fun. I mean, I'm not going to lie. It was like a party every week. Especially if you were there in the building live. You know, I was also a teenager by then, so I was right in that target audience that they were catering to. They didn't go PG for another decade. But you could already see years before that, the product, it just wasn't what it used to be. It was like this steady decline. They were still using edgy language. They were still coming up with these outrageous storylines. The Katie Vick story. Kane and Lita and her miscarriage. Kurt Angle wanting to have bestiality sex with Booker T's wife. This is real shit that they did. That didn't make the shows any better. I mean, there was some pretty bad shit during that time period in the mid-2000s. Whatever the fuck Heidenreich did to Michael Cole that one time on SmackDown. Actually, Heidenreich said the idea came directly from Vince McMahon. Vince told him it came to him in a dream. How would you like to be trapped in a Vince McMahon dream? Not even Stephen King could write something so terrifying. But that's just a sample of some of the wonderful things that we got to see before the return to PG. Just to show you that it wasn't all good. Just because they didn't have the handcuffs on. But something you may not realize is that SmackDown has always been a TV PG rated show. Ever since the very first episode on UPN back in 1999, it's always been a PG show. And there have been some classic SmackDown moments over the years, some really good shit on SmackDown. And the rating in the corner of the screen had absolutely nothing to do with it. It came down to two things: the talent and the creative. When you have the talent that can deliver and the creative that supports them, you end up with great television. It's a very simple formula. Look at NXT. Just look at what they have done with NXT 2.0. They are trying to appeal to a younger demographic. So we get dick jokes and condom jokes. We've got close-up shots every week of Mandy Rose and her cleavage. We've got adult language. Andre Chase is saying the word fuck every week, even though obviously they censor it. It's basically already a TV-14 show, but it says TV PG on the screen when the show comes on the air every week. But what difference would it actually make? How different could that show possibly be if they changed the rating? It's not going to make a lick of difference. All this talk about the rating is meaningless. And the reason that it is meaningless, the whole point of all this, is because no matter what happens, the same 76-year-old man is still running WWE creative. Vince McMahon is still responsible for the creative direction of this show. And so long as Vince McMahon is responsible for the creative direction of the show, absolutely nothing will change. If anything, it could get worse, knowing his sense of humor. Vince may leave one day and the shows could get worse. He may leave and the shows could improve and actually get better. But so long as he is still in that chair, so long as he is still ripping up scripts and rewriting them 2 hours before the show, so long as the writers are putting together a show to appeal to him, as long as they're writing for an audience of one, I don't see how anybody could be excited about any of this. You are setting yourself up for disappointment. What are you doing? Don't do that. The belief is that this is a USA Network call. This is not a WWE call that USA has to approve. This is coming from the network. The network supposedly wants to make this change. And WWE will go along with whatever the network wants because they're the ones paying hundreds of millions of dollars every year to WWE for their content. I would like to remind you all about the significance of this month. This month marks the 10-year anniversary of Raw's permanent move to 3 hours every week. It was July of 2012. Raw 1000, right? That was the night CM Punk, I think, went heel and laid out The Rock at the end of the show, and DX beat up Damian Sandow at the beginning of the show. It was one big celebration. They did a huge number. I think that's still the biggest rating that Raw did, probably above a 5. It was in the 5 or 6 range. I mean, it did some ridiculous number. They haven't even come close to touching that ever since. But up to that point, they only had the occasional 3-hour show. If they did a King of the Ring gimmick, that show might be 3 hours, right? It was rare, but it did happen. But that was the first week where it went 3 hours permanently every single week. At that time, that was also said to be a USA Network decision. It was not something that WWE wanted to do. Writing 3 hours of television is not easy. And the show has lost viewers every year since. You know what the bigger change would be? If USA Network is so hell-bent on making a change to Monday Night Raw, the rating doesn't mean shit. The rating of the show doesn't mean shit. The bigger change, the better change, would be to scale Monday Night Raw back to 2 hours. Now, that's not likely to happen. USA still does its best numbers with Raw every week. I can't imagine they're going to want to cut the show down by an hour. And also, making the show shorter doesn't mean the show is necessarily going to be better. SmackDown lately, I think, is proof of that. That's a 2-hour show. But it would force them to tighten the show up. There wouldn't be as many segments where it feels like they're just trying to eat up as much time as possible. So even a bad Raw would not be as bad because there's 60 minutes less of it to sit through. But at the end of the day, it comes down to the writing. The writing and the booking, those are two different things, by the way. Those are not the same thing. The writing and the booking, that's ultimately what it all boils down to. You want to change something for the better, that is the only change that USA Network should be considering.